emission regulations. That would mean that the TLC is, signaling that they would use the manipulated data on utilization that the companies have been providing, you know, since, sorry about that the companies have been providing to the TLC, since during these lockout months. All of this is completely unacceptable. Uber and Lyft are getting away with cheating out the biggest private workforce in the city of New York, a workforce that labors with no security to their life and with all the expenses on their shoulders. They carry all the risks on this job and they take none of the benefits. And the very basic idea of a minimum wage is now being shattered in the same city that led these efforts several years ago and was the first one to win these protections for this workforce. For its part, Uber claimed to have had a wait list to put a control to manage the oversaturation. In a Bloomberg News article in July, we learned that the new vehicles that the Taxi Limousine Commission allowed in by illegally lifting a vehicle cap, a life-saving vehicle cap that had been in place, including for EVs, that the TLC lifted in October. At the time, Uber's agents said, don't worry about it. There won't be oversaturation because Uber has a wait list. Well, we learned in July that that wait list was as phony as Uber's claims that it's going to end the lockout soon. They continue to allow to, add drivers, to add the new vehicles, and that when they don't have enough work, and they're now making the drivers, punishing the drivers for their decisions. The oversaturation, meanwhile, has worked very well for Uber and Lyft, which actually have more trips than before. So we're holding this press conference to shed light on this grave injustice and this deep crisis that thousands of Uber and Lyft drivers are facing in the city of New York. Also, because we're really appalled by the role of the city here. The city is supposed to use its leverage and its power to side with the drivers and to regulate for a solution. Instead, they've allowed the companies to get away with a private agreement that does not end lockouts, that essentially locks in low pay. Not only is this immoral and ineffective, we believe, potentially illegal. And that's why today we are releasing a joint public letter with the New York Taxi Workers Alliance Towards Justice and Open Markets Institute to bring to the attention of the mayor the unlawfulness of the private agreement, that has remained incredibly ineffective. A few days ago, to stop the momentum of our upcoming action on September 4th, when at 1 p.m., thousands of drivers, Uber and Lyft drivers, will gather at Broadway and Murray outside of City Hall to protest and to hold a protest march from City Hall to Uber's headquarters. Uber put out a message where if you read it really fast, it looks like they're trying to say that the lockouts could end beginning on the 3rd of September. But when you read the message properly, and more importantly, if you read the article that's out in AM New York today, Uber admits that it expects the lockouts to actually continue. So City Hall, facilitated a private agreement that has not ended our crisis and has only given more leverage, power, and time to the companies to further exploit the drivers. So with that, actually going to turn it over to our speakers. We're actually going to begin with our attorneys and our economists who co-authored the letter to the mayor that's being released publicly today. So we're going to begin First with Zubin Soleimani, who's the senior staff attorney at the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. All of our members know Zubin's work quite well. The $328 million wage theft recovery from the Attorney General's office's settlement with Uber and Lyft over its wage theft, where for years it took the cost of the sales tax and the black card fund surcharge from the drivers rather than charging it to the passengers. Um, that work was done on behalf of our union by our brother Zubin, our staff attorney. Zubin was also co-counsel on a presidential case that won unemployment for drivers of Uber and Lyft across the state of New York, which became a life-saving benefit, particularly during COVID, and many, many other victories. But following Zubin will be David Seligman, who is also has been a advocate of the drivers and works closely with the drivers, our brothers and sisters in Colorado. David is joining us today in his work directly with the Taxi Workers Alliance as the executive director of Towards Justice. And we're also being joined today by Brian Kalachi, who is the chief economist at Open Markets Institute, a leading watchdog that watches over, the impact of monopolization to protect the interests of our democracy, of our economy, the general public, both consumers and workers. And we're so honored to have David and Brian and their organizations on the front line with us in this critical fight for the survival of over 100,000 Uber and Lyft drivers in New York City. But with that, I would like to turn it over very proudly to my beloved colleague, our senior staff attorney, Zubin Soleimani.
Good morning, and thank you for the very kind introduction. So Barry gave a good background on utilization rate and how it's being applied. I'm just going to follow up a little bit more on that and how what the companies are doing is a subversion of the pay rules and is directly violating the purpose of the rules that TLC expressly stated they would serve when they were passed. And how the incentive created to game the rules is not being corrected either by the lockouts or by any TLC action right now. So when TLC first passed the driver pay rule in 2018, it took a couple of steps to make sure that the rules pay standard wouldn't lose value over time depending on economic circumstances. The first was to peg the pay rates to the annual measure of inflation every year, which has been hugely important in assuring that value doesn't go down depending on the price of consumer goods. The second thing was to peg the rate of pay based on how busy drivers were in the aggregate. So like an inflation-adjusted pay measurement, it looks at what market conditions are and ensure that the drivers are insulated from those. And the way that functioned, just broadly, as Barry said, was if things get busier and the utilization rate goes up, the pay rate can go down, but that's okay because as drivers would be busier, the amount that they would take home would be the same. If there was a downturn, drivers would be insulated from that because the pay rate could go up per trip and they would still take the same amount of pay. The proper functioning of that rule assumes that there are no lockouts. That is the only way that the rule could function properly. Engaging in that is a direct subversion of the purpose of the rule. And I think this is clear in the rule itself, because what I want to be clear about here is that when these companies are doing this, when they're giving data to TLC that doesn't provide information about all the times that drivers are on the app, they are not giving the data that is needed to produce a proper utilization rate. The TLC is then going forward making a decision based on corrupted and manipulated data that doesn't reflect what the rule requires. And just to give an example of this, I mean, the way that this would happen is, say you have a driver who lives in the Bronx. They drive to Manhattan. They make a pickup in Manhattan. They drop that passenger off in Eastern Queens. And then from that point, they are locked out when they drop the passenger off in Queens, say until an hour later when they get back in Manhattan. Now, during that time, when the driver is coming back from Queens to Manhattan, the driver is available to work. They have expressed their willingness to work. The app says go somewhere where it's busier. The driver is doing that. They are not with their kids. They are not, they're not taking care of their family or doing anything else with their time other than trying to work. And what's important is the TLC rule doesn't ask companies to report time that drivers are logged into the app. The TLC rules specifically require that the utilization rate is supposed to measure time in which drivers make themselves available to receive dispatches. That driver who dropped a passenger off in Queens and is locked out had made himself available and is still available in the time where he is pursuing the next fare where the app says the busy areas are. Like deleting that data and not reflecting that time as the lockouts do is a failure to provide the needed data to make the rule function as it properly should. So this lowers pay in two ways, right? The first is, of course, if drivers are locked out, they can't work, and that immediate decrease in income. The second way is through the diminution of the rate going forward. With inaccurate data that's locked in for the entire year following, the drivers would be paid at a rate that doesn't reflect their actual rate of utilization, their actual amount of empty time. So the TLC could have, and the TLC's rule when it was established was kind of the gold standard for how states or local governments could establish fair pay for ride-hail drivers. And part of that was that it didn't just set a piece rate. A piece rate doesn't really mean anything if there aren't enough trips. The utilization rate was really going to make the rule function like a real minimum wage law should. But you can have the strongest regulations in the world on paper, and if you don't enforce them, which is what letting the company's game manipulate the utilization rate is non-enforcement, then the regulatory scheme here is just a facade. So, thank you. That's. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Zubin. I think today we're releasing a public letter to the mayor. So we wanted, Zubin was really giving the background as to the city regulations here, and the ways that the companies are gaming the rules. I wanted David and then to talk about really the message in our letter that's being released today with regards to this only solution that the city has put forth here is to facilitate a private agreement between Uber and Lyft that again does not end lockouts. And even today, Uber is saying it does not it expects the lockouts to continue, even though 2 days ago, Uber sent out a message to drivers where if you read it really fast, a driver could think it means that the lockouts are about to end. But again, in the media, their public statement that was released last night, it's in AM New York Today, Uber basically affirmed that they expect the lockouts to continue. David, could you talk about how not only has this agreement been ineffective, immoral, leaves drivers off the table, done behind the doors, nothing in public, we never had an opportunity to even comment on this, but also how it's potentially unlawful as far as antitrust law is concerned.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Great. Yeah, so first, my name is David Seligman. I'm a lawyer that frequently litigates cases under the antitrust laws to help people and communities attack abuses of corporate power. What's happening here may be the most egregious recent example of how these companies are exploiting their market power to compete unfairly for the purpose of subverting city law and to harm drivers and customers, everyone in New York City. We'll hear more from Brian Kalachi from Open Markets about the company's pervasive unfair competition, how they claim, that drivers are independent but still exercise extraordinary control over drivers, and through the lockouts are controlling the time and place of work to cheat drivers out of their lawful pay, even while driving up prices, seemingly. But the agreement we see between the companies, right under the noses of the Adams administration, seems to represent something new and deeply concerning. In this case, the companies appear to be colluding with each other right out in the open. Uber has seemingly agreed with Lyft to reduce lockouts, but only if Lyft simultaneously increases lockouts to reach a utilization rate of 50%. That appears to be a blatant agreement between duopolists, the two powerful entities in this rideshare market, to restrain trade, which is a violation of black letter principles of federal and state antitrust law. If all the sandwich restaurants in New York City agreed only to sell a certain number of sandwiches per day, that would be a per se violation of the law. What we're seeing here doesn't seem to be any different, except the stakes are even higher. The livelihood of thousands and thousands of people are on the line. The companies should be competing with each other with high wages for drivers and low prices for consumers. That's what fair competition is supposed to look like, and that's what our laws require. What our antitrust laws expressly and clearly prohibit is competitors coming together to agree, to collude, not to compete over these things. And because the goal of this arrangement is explicitly to avoid an increase in minimum pay rates for drivers, the collusive conduct here amounts to a wage fixing agreement. The New York Taxi Workers Alliance letter to the Adams administration says this appears to be blatant collusion in violation of the antitrust laws. But it's not only about the company's conduct, it's also about the Adams administration's role. What seems to have happened here is the Adams administration has surrendered its role in regulating the market to protect consumers and workers, seemingly permitting the minimum pay laws to be subverted. Instead, it has allowed the companies, through private agreement, to come together through collusion to regulate themselves for their own profit. The law doesn't permit that sort of conduct.
Thank you very much, David. And to the members of the media, we have in the press advisory e-blast that went out this morning, there is a link to the PDF of the letter. We will also be sending it out after the press conference. We'll also be posting it both on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, David. I would now like to turn to Brian Kalachi. The Chief Economist at Open Markets Institute. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Brian Kalachi. I'm Chief Economist at the Open Markets Institute. And if you don't know who we are, we're a think tank. We do wonk stuff focused on anti-monopoly policy. And we advocate for policy to foster open and publicly governed markets and to promote shared prosperity and democracy. Just speaking as an economist here, the economic issues at stake are pretty clear. The first feature to note about the ride-hailing market is that it's a duopoly. Drivers have only two options. And by now, we actually have pretty good, economic evidence that these companies have, in fact, market power over drivers, meaning that they can suppress pay levels below the competitive level. And a recent estimate put this at a wage markdown at about 14%. For those interested in the technical term, it's called monopsony. But public regulations like the minimum wage rule, the TLC enacted, and others are essential to counter this kind of market power. These are anti-monopoly tools. And second, The companies don't just exist as a duopoly. They further restrict the economic freedom of drivers, magnifying their already existing market power by the use of the kind of coercive contracts that David alluded to, what we in antitrust call vertical restraints that basically prevent drivers from getting the best price for their labor. So this can be blatant, such as price and wage fixing, or it can be more subtle, such as using incentives and penalties to make it difficult for drivers to, say, multi-home across platforms to get the best price. Again, these contracts allow companies to treat workers like their employees, order them around, while avoiding accountability as employers. So the question comes up, which are they? But third, what this all adds up to is that ride-hailing companies are operating private internal labor markets. We heard that word private agreement over and over. These are not the open public markets of economic models that I teach students. The app and the algorithms do not simply match supply and demand. They're not passive. Rather, these companies have set up opaque and privately governed markets that they are free to manipulate and rig against both consumers and workers. And the lockouts are only the most recent version of this. I work at a place called the Open Markets Institute. Open markets does not mean a free-for-all where companies get to abuse their power. That's what antitrust is all about, setting rules of fair competition to make sure that everyone's treated fairly. And in taxi markets, the primary public regulatory tool we have many, but the one we've been using that's worked well is regulating the number of licenses. So the ride-hailing companies have subverted this public accountable government mechanisms with lockouts, which are private, unaccountable manipulation of their, again, internal private labor markets. So now the companies have been allowed to form a private collusive agreement between each other to suppress driver pay and manipulate future pay rates. We've already heard the details about how this is done, so I won't go into that. But these kinds of private agreements, without ongoing public oversight and supervision, they're simply, first of all, contrary to the public policy or competition laws, as David pointed out earlier. But also, they're just not sound economic governance at all, and they're not democratically accountable.
Thank you very much, Brian. I would like to now, I'm going to call on two of our members to speak to really talk about what the impact of the lockouts have been. I mean, again, before I call on Alpha and Nicholas, who are getting themselves ready to be on in a minute, I just want to remind everybody, in 2017, there was a TLC public hearing. It was about the economics for Uber and Lyft drivers. It was the first hearing of its kind. In fact, after that hearing, the TLC hired, they commissioned two leading economists to study what driver incomes. Those economists, Dr. James Parrott and Dr. Michael Reich, found that almost 90% of Uber and Lyft drivers in 2017 were earning below minimum wage. Drivers who were working back then will remember that in the very beginning, 2013, 14, 15, Uber and Lyft were using bonuses to attract drivers. And then in 2016, after they had a mass of vehicles, they then cut the rates on each trip. One of the reasons that the Taxi and Limousine Commission regulated these minimum pay rates, they're supposed to be minimum, is because prior to this rule, there was no floor. So they were underpaying, they kept cutting the rates that they were paying, that they were charging the passengers in order to outcompete the rest of the industry. And because drivers earned a percentage from those rates, the drivers suffered. The companies made that business decision on their own, but they made the drivers pay the price. And so the TLC, in enacting the minimum pay rules, really set up a floor so no driver income falls below that floor. Because, under a floor, it's dirt, and that's sinking poverty. So that was really the purpose of these pay rules. And again, that floor is based on the concept of minimum wage. It's tied to the minimum wage rates in the state of New York. And now this is after it's supposed to be after expenses, you're supposed to be able to take home, now, at this point, about $20 an hour. And so again, after expenses, when Uber and Lyft engage in these lockouts, well, actually, first of all, when Uber and Lyft oversaturate, that means each driver is being left with less trips. They're already losing income. When Uber and Lyft engage in lockouts, forcing drivers to just drive around empty, aimlessly, you're burning fuel, you're losing time, and you're working with a lot of anxiety and in a job where you need to stay alert because you're operating a vehicle. You need to stay alert to keep yourself safe on the streets. You need to stay alert when you have someone in the back seat. And when you're working with this level of stress and anxiety, completely changes it not only affects your health, it changes your ability to stay safe on these streets and, literally to survive both financially and just in terms of your safety. So, right now, in 2017, when the TLC had that public hearing, I remember testifying and saying that I had never, in all my years of organizing, had never seen drivers in such a state of despair, and really asked the TLC and the city, the mayor at the time, to take immediate action. And I remember talking about the level of depression across the industry. At the end of that year is when we saw the most horrifying and heart-wrenching crisis in the history of our industry, where 9 drivers died by suicide. We're at a really serious point right now in this industry. The city needs to regulate to stop the bleeding out. Tens of thousands of Uber and Lyft drivers are in a serious crisis. And with the oversaturation, it's also left drivers across this industry with less income and less trips. So I see Nicholas is ready. So I'm gonna call on our brother Nicholas Silikisi, who is a longtime Uber and Lyft driver, to talk about what the lockout has meant for him personally and for the fellow drivers that are part of his community. Nicholas, you can unmute.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning, brother.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone doing good. Thank you for having me, my sister. So, I want to start like we mentioned, and the main point. I've been driving Uber and Lyft since almost more than 5 years.
I'm sorry, Nicholas, could you speak up, brother? We're starting to lose the sound.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's
Okay.
good.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. So I've been driving Uber and Lyft more than 5 years, and because of this huge problem we all know nowadays, I was listening right now everybody's opinion because of the huge problem became nowadays in this industry, these lockouts. First of all, I am paying my car every week $550. This is a weekly rental. Not only me, I'm sure every other drivers, like most of the drivers, we are paying every week $550. Every day I've been locked out maximum 4 or 5 times every single day. So imagine we are working, we want work. I am a full-time driver, which works 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week. And imagine every Thursday, I am paying more than $550, and I've been locked out so many times. So literally, we cannot make money at all. I cannot make money at all. Yesterday, when I dropped the passenger near LaGuardia Airport. I dropped the passenger near Astoria. 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and 40 minutes I've been locked out the time by time. Imagine one thing that if there's no Uber in general, right, and if there's no driver, how can we serve the community? Because it was yesterday was Thursday, it was busy night. Usually Thursdays are always busy night, and it was before busy. I saw a lot of people in the bars, whatever restaurants, they are sitting outside. I really wanted work, and guess what? I am locked out. I cannot pick up anybody. And the latter lately, we received email that Uber and Lyft wants to reducing, like the lockouts. We all know that reducing does not mean permanently cancel. Reducing cannot help all the entire drivers to solve our problems. We are fighting and we will fighting until we will win. Because reducing means out of the 10 times, I'm still gonna be locked out. If I will be like 7 times lockout and 3 times not lockout, what does it mean, right? It doesn't make any sense at all. I want to claim my message with everybody that, like we want permanently cancel. It's not only I am the situation, my wife also full-time driver. We woke up sometimes 4, 5 a.m. to start, one passenger, another passenger, that's it. We are like a couple of hours locked out and we cannot go online. So what does it mean? This means that Uber and Lyft plays the dirty game. They try to take our money and they try to, give us the message or you know what? Because we have so many drivers and da-da-da-da-da, that's why we've been locked out. Let me ask you a very good point. If there's so many drivers in the industry, right? Why they still issuing TLC license? IDG, they just opened recently one school, and we have one more school in Brooklyn, in Sunset Park. So what does it mean? People still taking license, but Uber and Lyft claim that we have so many drivers. I don't think so. It makes sense. Just think about it. This is like simple logic, right? And one more time, I want to clearly give this message. Reducing doesn't mean the permanently cancelled. So we never take this pony, like the pony or whatever this message. So we want cancelled, and we never agree with Uber and Lyft and we will definitely continue fight unless we will win. And we're spreading every driver words, make sure we get united and make sure we will finish these lockouts again. Thank you so much. That was my clear message.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. And that's right. On September 4th, on Wednesday at 1 p.m. at Broadway and Murray, we're going to be out on the streets. As Brother Nicholas said, we have put out a call. We'll let the companies and the city know that our union is seriously organizing for a strike. On Wednesday, we aim to shut down downtown with a protest march from City Hall to Uber's headquarters. We have a strike pledge that is out. We continue to collect signatures from drivers for a minimum 24-hour strike. We want Uber to understand that we're not going to take this lying down. We're not shaking in the knees. Uber is not the only power player in the city of New York. Organized drivers have power, and we plan to unleash that power. If Uber does not stop the lockouts and the Taxi and Limousine Commission does not implement regulations to permanently close up the loopholes, take away the threat of lockouts, not only today, but also into the future, reset the pay rates to the actual utilization rate so that drivers are no longer underpaid. If our demands are not met, we plan to go on a citywide minimum 24-hour strike. Wednesday, September 4th, we're going to shut down downtown with our protest march. And on that day, we plan to announce the date of our strike. Our next speaker is now Brother Alpha Barry. Alpha, if you can unmute.
Can you see me?
We hear you. We don't see you, brother, but we do hear you.
Hold on.
Yes, we see you
Can you
now.
hear me now? All right.
Yes.
So, give me one second. Let me pull over. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alpha Barry. I'm an NYTWA member. I've been driving since 2003. It's almost 21 years I've been driving it. Drivers, we are, this is, we have never went to, I've been driving for so long, but us as driver, we have never go through this before. This is the hardest moment in our lifetime. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're listening to you.
Okay. So when I've been locked out for 2 weeks now, I was not able to go online. My acceptance rating is 90, 95, 99, 91%. My rating is 5+. I already picked up more than 30,000, almost 30,000 passengers. I drive for Lyft. Uber deactivate me because of passenger. Somebody complained about he left his phone. The person left his phone in the cab, and then I took the phone back. So the main thing is that we are being deactivated unfairly. Now they came up with the lockout. First, when Uber came, there were so many drivers. Drivers were making money. Uber was still making money. So the pandemic hit, some drivers left. So what is the difference from when they started and now? They're talking about there's so many drivers. Back then, we have more drivers and every driver was making money. And now they said they always have excuse. Now they're saying there's more drivers than drivers who are making money. What changed? What changed? This is just they're trying to. My rent is $2,500. I pay for my car $407 insurance. How am I going to survive? I also have family to feed. Me being locked out for 2 weeks now. I hear this guy, some people are saying they walk a little bit and they come back. I was not able even to go online. It's not even, you're not even talking about, oh, you're gonna go online for 5 minutes or or for 2 minutes or for 45 minutes. I was not even able to go online. This is devastating to us. What they're doing to us is very devastating. We need help. We are going through a lot. We need help. We are going through a lot. Uber and Lyft should go to hell because of this. Okay? Please, we are pledging to the mayor, to whoever will be able to help us to take this lockout up, because if then it doesn't work, it's not going to work now, because they were still making money back then. Why they brought up the lockout now? If they were making money back then, why they're not making money now? And now they're saying the lockout. They're locking us out for no reason. For no reason. Because of the utilization rate. They're taking, they are finding an excuse because they were upset about the utilization rate. Now they're taking it on drivers. What doesn't have anything to do? They are punishing drivers because of the utilization rate. They don't want to pay us. They don't want to pay us what they're supposed to give us. You know, even if that happens, they say you're not going to win all the time. Sometimes you have to lose to gain somewhere. You cannot just win all the time. You know, you can't say, oh, because of utilization rate. Then that thing you make money, why not making money now? You know, they steal our money. They also deactivate us for no reason. Now they're locking us out. What did they want from us as drivers? This is just too much. We're going through hell right now. Drivers are going through hell. It's too much. I'm sometimes like when you can't even go to sleep thinking about it. You know? So please, we need help. I don't know where we're going to get it, but we need help. We are going through a lot as drivers. Please help. I thank everyone for organizing this and for organizing, put me online to speak my mind. But please listen to us as drivers. We're going through a lot.
Thank you,
very
Alpha.
much. Yeah.
Thank you, my brother. We're going to help ourselves. That's why we're
Yeah.
organizing. We're going to be out there on Wednesday at 1 p.m. outside City Hall, and we will be announcing our plans for a citywide 24-hour, minimum 24-hour strike if our
Okay.
demands are not met.
Mm.
I would like to open it up. If there are any members of the media who have questions, I see a lot of our members. We're going to be having a membership meeting on Zoom at 8 p.m. But right now for this press event, I would like to open it up if there are any reporters. I see a number of you on here. If you would like to ask a question. Okay. Samantha Liebman from New York.
Yeah. Hi. I
Mhm.
just wanted you just in very simple terms, if you could just explain the lockout. You know, what was the purpose of it initially, you know, and why has it gotten out of control? Just like very simply, if you can keep it short so our viewers can understand it better.
Uber and Lyft are using the lockouts to manipulate how much of the time drivers are shown to be empty so that they can get out of having to pay drivers the full rates that the drivers are owed on all of their trips. This is, so the Taxi and Limousine Commission sets the pay for the minimum amount that Uber and Lyft have to pay to the drivers on each trip per mile and per minute. And part of the calculation for those pay rates is the percentage of time that drivers are found to be empty. So Uber and Lyft are trying to cover up how much empty time they report to the TLC so they don't have to pay drivers more on each trip. That's what it boils down to. Sorry, sorry, Sam, you could unmute
Oh,
again.
no, it's okay. Thank you. That was great. It just seems very random too, because it just seems that these drivers are just being locked out. They pick up two fares and then all of a sudden they're locked out. Or they're in a very heavy zone where there are a lot of people requesting, yet they're locked out. You know, the driver that I went with this morning said that he's picked up people who said they waited a long time, yet there's tons of empty cars sitting around because they're locked out. I mean, is there something with the algorithm? Like, what is going on here?
No, this is intentional. This is an economic policy that Uber has set in place so that they can avoid having to pay drivers all the money that drivers are due for all the hours that they are working. They're locking drivers out, even if the driver is a 5-star driver. The driver could have purchased a brand new vehicle. The driver could be in a surge zone where they tell the public that they're surging to the passenger because there's more passengers and less drivers, but they are the ones who have created the scarcity in the number of drivers by locking the drivers out. There's no rhyme or reason to what Uber is doing. it's pure greed and it's manipulation to evade having to pay the drivers all the income that the drivers are owed. I don't know, Sam, if you had a follow-up.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna go to Dawood and then to Evan next. Dawood Mian from Auto Marketplace. Yes.
Hey, Bhairavi, thanks a lot for taking the question. I just want to double click on, and you mentioned it in the letters, and you've mentioned it a lot, is the release of those TLC plates or FHV licenses in October, which you could say, I know a lot of the discussion is focused on Uber and Lyft, but on a first principles basis, if there's too many vehicles chasing a limited amount of trips, I'm not saying that's 100% as we discuss, but that's an influence. The specific question I have for you is there an update on the lawsuit? Because I know there was supposed to be kind of a final hearing within the last few days. And the second question is, in your mind, how much is the TLC at fault for oversaturating the market, which in turn might have led to lockouts?
I mean, that this is like a Bollywood movie where there's multiple villains here. There's enough blame to go around. The TLC absolutely failed in its obligation to protect the drivers by lifting the cap in the way that they did and allowing this crisis of oversaturation. Many of you will remember, TLC lifted the cap on EVs in October, but last March, the TLC first, allowed for 1,000, they said 1,000 limited plates and for EVs. And then they issued 2,500 special, green cab SHL pilot plates. You will recall that at the time, our union, in fact, we confronted the TLC chairman at a public hearing. And one of the things we said was, you just weakened the TLC utilization rule, where the TLC applied a 58% utilization rate in the pay formula and regulated for a utilization band. So even if the actual utilization fell to 53% in the pay formula, the rate would remain 58%, which meant that the companies were given room to oversaturate and still not have to pay drivers to compensate for the driver's loss of income from loss of trips. Again, that alone would have left drivers with a loss of about $4,000 for the year of income. At the time, the TLC said, the utilization has remained steady, around 56 to 58%. Uber itself said that, Uber urged the TLC to make that rule change. And Uber said that with that rule change, Uber implied that with that rule change, there would not be lockouts. And, but then a few weeks later, the TLC started to issue the new plates, and we reacted immediately and warned the TLC and said, you just weakened the rule. And so drivers are going to start to lose income immediately for, at least, average of $4,000 a year. Secondly, we said lockouts are going to come back and potentially you're going to have mass deactivations. So we warned about the crisis of poverty that was about to be unleashed on the drivers and the crisis of job security. The TLC did not listen to those warnings, and 6 months later, instead, they lifted the cap on the EVs. While we filed a lawsuit and we were granted a temporary restraining order, but by the time the TRO went into effect, there are already about 9,000 license applications that were submitted to the TLC. The TLC at that point could have acted differently with the TRO in place, with the lawsuit in effect. They could have put an end to those applications even on their own. But the TLC chose not to do that. And then, it appears to me, I mean, I was very shocked. TLC had said at a city council hearing that it would take them several months to process those applications and to have those new vehicles on the streets. Yet it looks to me like within a very short period of few months, all those cars started hitting the streets. Uber is also not blameless here. During this whole time period, Uber claimed that it had a wait list, but we learned in this July that the wait list seemingly did not apply to those new vehicles. And so, Uber went along with the oversaturation in large part because oversaturation has always been core to Uber's business model. Uber and Lyft, even during these months of, as Alpha said, the worst crisis that Uber and Lyft drivers have faced in this city. During these same months of terror for the drivers, Uber and Lyft collectively have been dispatching more trips and, presumably earning more money from those dispatches. So Uber is also to blame here. And at this point in time, when the oversaturation has happened and has happened at the hands of both the regulator that was supposed to protect us and the company that is supposed to also care about the well-being of its workers that make it its riches, we're at this point now, we have to address the moment. In this moment, even if lockouts end, the reality is there's not enough work and drivers are still going to suffer. They need to adjust the rates so that drivers can be properly compensated for the impact from the oversaturation. And specifically, given that the data that the TLC is now displaying on utilization since June is all manipulated, faulty data. TLC should not be allowed to rely on it to set the utilization rate next year. They need to discard that data. They need to use the numbers that they have prior to the lockout period and reset the rates properly and allow for natural attrition to reshift the oversaturation. Instead of drivers being squeezed out financially, drivers being forced out by mass deactivations, we need to allow for a natural attrition where drivers of their own choosing or life circumstances end up exiting the industry, keep the vehicle plate, cap in place, allow for natural attrition, meanwhile, reset the utilization rate and move the review period to 2 years from now. Those are the only real solutions to the crisis at hand.
Only one quick follow-up just to clarify on the letter. Or is NYTWA's position that the lockouts equate to wage theft? Is that a position, or is that not a position quite yet?
Do you want to respond to that, Subin?
I mean, I think the lockouts subvert the purpose of the pay rule and make it impossible for TLC to make it impossible for the right rates to be calculated going into the future. So what you would have is an inaccurate pay rate based on the manipulation of data.
Got it. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dawood. Evan, you can unmute.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon at this point. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, good morning.
Hey, Biddy. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about, aside from asking TLC to amend the pay rule to match the current situation, in terms of rulemaking, what are you asking TLC to do, or what would you have TLC do? When I talk to folks at TLC, it sounds like they're saying they're blind to lockouts because lockouts in the data that they have, according to them, doesn't look any different from somebody not logging on to the app. So what can you ask for in terms of rulemaking to basically, if the hope is to somehow legally restrict Uber and Lyft from being able to do this, what kind of a rule do you need?
The TLC can easily fix this by closing up the loopholes. If they are blind to the lockouts as far as the data is concerned, it's because they're allowing the companies to game their own rules. Subin, do you want to answer to that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think so. I mean, just it's a pretty simple fix, Evan. And I think what like I think it starts with the starting place, understanding that the current rule language calls for this data to be reported. The current rule language says utilization is the time in which passengers are being transported out of the total time that drivers make themselves available to accept a dispatch. I see that as a driver attempting to go online or a driver attempting to stay online after a trip. If it's TLC's position that the current rules don't collect data sufficient for them to measure an accurate, non-lockout manipulated the data reporting point for utilization, they can easily amend the rules to say that the data, should reflect that time frame. And to do and that doing that, wouldn't be changing what utilization means. Doing that would just be collecting the data necessary to understand what utilization means in the terms that TLC wrote 6 years ago, and finally catching up to getting sufficient data to reflect that 6-year-old rule language.
So it sounds, forgive me, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. I just want to clarify. It sounds like you're saying that as the rule is currently written, there's already a requirement for that data.
Yeah, the rule defines utilization, yes, to mean all the time that drivers have made themselves available to accept dispatches.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
And I just want to quickly add, I think what part of what we are saying with today's letter is that the city's response that the only solution the city has put forth here is allowing Uber or facilitating Uber and Lyft to engage in a private agreement. And that is not a solution. We see that private agreement as unlawful. The city here needs to step in and properly regulate to fix this crisis. It cannot throw its arms up in the air and act powerless here, especially when it has made a conscious decision to appear to be powerless and to allow the companies to collude in a private agreement that cheats drivers out of income that they are owed. So TLC, the city of New York, the TLC and the mayor don't get a free pass here. They're going to need to regulate, and the regulation is actually what is necessary in order to fix this crisis for the drivers. I think what we're saying is we understand that even if the city regulates, Uber and Lyft have not shown themselves to be, good social actors. We know they may threaten lawsuits, and, in other cities where they can afford to leave or pretend they can afford to leave, they will threaten that they're going to leave that city. In New York, the gameplay has been to threaten litigation. They can't just say they're going to leave New York City because this is their breadbasket. The fact that they cannot leave New York City means that is leverage that the city of New York has. And instead of using that leverage to protect the drivers, the city has abdicated in its moral and legal responsibility, by refusing to really regulate here. We are going to fix that because we're going to stay on the streets, keep up the public pressure on the mayor and the TLC to regulate, and public pressure on Lyft and Uber to cooperate with that regulation, because we need a solution to this crisis that's going to work for everybody and foremost for the drivers. I don't know if there are sorry, Evan, you could unmute if you had any follow-up.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Evan. If there are any other members of the media, I know we've gone over time just a little bit. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Okay, then I'm going to actually give the last word to one of our members, Mr. Mohammed. Mr. Mohammed, you can unmute.
Hi, baby. How are you? How is everyone? My name is Mohammed Mohammed. I drove for Uber and Lyft almost 10 years. And personally, about the lockout, personally, I can find out another job. I have less responsibility than any other drivers. I'm just trying to speak in behalf of those who cannot make the living, who cannot speak up and suffering. As far as I know, about 90,000 Uber and Lyft drivers on the roads. That means we have at least, if everyone have a family like consists of like 3 people, we're talking about more than 250,000 people here suffering. They cannot make a living. And also, I want to add something. The mayor, Eric Adam, if he doesn't know that he about what he cares, he go for a party in a Corona Park with IDG, and he doesn't know that IDG don't present Lyft driver. The only one can present the driver is NYTWA. It's funded by Ship, not IDG. IDG funded by Uber. So how come as a politician I go with IDG if you don't know that as a politician that you keep yourself close to IDG, so you are not loyal to us? You have a problem as a politician. You should not be at the office. Like a month ago, you announced the lockout will end up, and you announced it will end up soon. And then we have announcement it's going to be end up September 3rd. Why? Why it should not be end up like 3 weeks ago or 1 month ago? Why is it September 3rd? And why is made in the absence of the drivers, in the absence of someone who present us? How come you make agreement with Uber and Lyft without the driver's presentation? You have to make agreement in the exist of us, not in the absence of the drivers. One more thing, Uber and Lyft, when they came to the industry, they told us there is a main frame for the company, for its work, like a main blueprint. Now, Uber and Lyft, they changed the whole blueprint. Imagine yourself, like if you have apartment, you rent apartment, and the landlord give you agreement and tell you, okay, but before I give it to you, you're gonna sign this arbitration, and you fine, it's okay. I'm gonna sign the arbitration. I accept it. Then all of a sudden, day by day, the landlord he keeps changing the whole structure of your apartment. He changed the location of your bathroom, of your kitchen, of the living room. Not only that, the landlord take the key from you and tell you what time you go to your apartment, what time you can get out, and what time I will let you stay in the apartment. Uber and Lyft changed the whole structure of the company, of that platform. That's not right. I think we need someone here to get involved. We need the AG to get involved. It's really a disaster for a lot of people living and depends on Uber and Lyft. We bought cars. We're talking about thousands. We're not talking here about hundreds of cars. We're talking about thousands of cars. I own a car, and many thousand own a car. What I'm gonna do now with this car? I'm gonna surrender my plate numbers, or what I'm gonna do? What about the last 10,000 issued? Plate number was issued by the TLC. As far as I know, just recently, anyone can own this plate or can buy this plate, and he doesn't have a driver license. How come you give plates and someone has no hack license or driver license? That's a corruption. That's something that has to be reviewed. It has to be stopped. It has to be go back again to the real driver who has a hack license. We need the AG to get involved. We have a corruption here. Thank you. I'm sorry for if I'm like I'm talking like I'm yelling, but I'm really upset for the needy driver, the driver who cannot express themselves. Thousands of drivers at LaGuardia, I was on the ground. They cannot speak English. They cannot express themselves. They have no choice. They like this park. Uber and Lyft, if they don't stop the lockout soon, today or maybe yesterday, they should be banned. You should be out of New York City. That's what I need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed. Well, everyone, on Wednesday, we're hitting the streets 1 p.m. outside City Hall at Broadway and Murray. You know, as Alpha said, I think part is Nicholas and Mr. Mohammed said, this is the most serious crisis facing Uber and Lyft drivers in, you know, the last half a decade in New York City, in one of its biggest global markets. The city has leverage. They have misused it. We're going to set things straight because we need a real solution and an end to this crisis. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Again, the letter that was released to the mayor, warning the mayor about the potential antitrust violations in the private agreement between Uber and Lyft and the need for real regulatory solution here will be posted online, both on Facebook and Twitter. Members of the media, if there are more drivers that you would like to speak with directly, one-on-one interview, ride along with, please do not hesitate to contact our union, and we will connect you with our members. Thank you so much, particularly to David and Brian, and on behalf of Zubin and all of us at the Taxi Workers Alliance, on behalf of Alpha and Nicholas, Mr. Mohammed, and Zubin and myself, thank you all for joining. See you on Wednesday on the streets.